Hi, in this video I'm ranking all the healing specs by how difficult they are to play in Mythic+. Now, some healers might be easy to pick up, but have a very high skill ceiling. That's not what the video is about. Instead, I'll focus mostly on skill floor, so how easy it is to play each healer for someone who is a beginner or intermediate and who is not looking to push the highest levels of keys. The list is for Season 2, but I'll also discuss some changes coming in the next season. Let's begin with the three-eyed elephant in the room, Oracle Discipline Priest. In its current iteration, Disc is the only healer that can reliably prevent lots of incoming damage, making the spec extremely powerful. And of course, when your abilities are very powerful, the spec will also feel somewhat easier to play. Between Penance and Powered Shield, you almost always have a powerful ability to press. Also, Disc Priests are currently a never-ending well of mana, and even without speccing into Shield Discipline as your main regeneration talent, you'll pretty much never run dry. However, Blizzard is addressing this in Season 3, increasing the mana cost of Powered Shield and Radiance. Nevertheless, I expect Priests to still be quite strong mana-wise even after these changes. Also, as you don't have an interrupt, playing Disc feels a little bit like being a passenger princess, not needing to worry about enemy casts and allowing you to focus fully on healing. Of course, if your group fails to interrupt, you will have to heal through it, but then at least it won't be your fault. Still, Disc Priest also brings with it some unique challenges that especially newer players may find difficult to navigate. One of these challenges is that you must keep track of atonement on your teammates and make sure that it never falls off. Although with Powered Radiance you have a very easy way of applying atonements, beginners can make mistakes here, and if Radiance is ever not available, you can run into some real problems. The constant switching between damaging abilities and healing allies can also be challenging for new players who by default might find a playstyle focusing only on your teammates more accessible. Another challenge as a Disc Priest is that you need to make myriads of small decisions, constantly deciding whom to target with your penance and with your shields. Finally, as a Disc Priest you must juggle many different cooldowns and map them out over the duration of an encounter. This can be quite challenging, but is also essential for playing the spec successfully. Especially Premonitions are noteworthy here, being among the most complex healing cooldowns in the game, and mastering these spells is not easy. All in all then, the easiness of Disc Priest is mainly carried by its power. Also, your healing setups are pretty easy to execute, and your infinite mana pockets make almost every other healer green in the face with envy. Nevertheless, there are many things that must be considered and micromanaged to play Disc Priest well. And all of these complexities add up to a rather respectable level of difficulty in general. As a result, I find it kind of difficult to rank Disc Priest correctly, but I think it should still go in the easy tier for now, especially when compared to some of the other healers. Next up, Holy Priest has long been regarded as the easiest healer to play, and to some extent that's still true. It is definitely the most straightforward healer in terms of its ability profile. Generally, if someone's health bar is low, you cast a spell and the health bar goes up. Especially Holy Word Serenity is a super strong single target heal that can top off individual players instantly. Also, your flash heal and heal are quite powerful, so your reactive healing feels very strong. Speaking of reactive healing, Holy Priest is presumably the most reactive healer in the list, as outside of keeping Renew on your teammates, there's little preparation needed for upcoming damage events. This makes the spec easier to pick up for new players. What's also a huge deal in terms of evaluating the difficulty of Holy Priest for beginners is the talent Restitution, which basically makes it so that when you die, you don't actually die. So, as a Holy Priest, every 10 minutes you have one free death, making the spec much more forgiving when failing to avoid dungeon mechanics. This is especially a big deal for healers who, besides the tank, are the party members that absolutely must not die. However, it's not all fun and games with Holy Priest. There are some distinct problems that players may struggle to overcome. These challenges revolve around Holy Priest's ability to heal group-wide damage, or rather, their lack of that ability. Sure, you have access to Holy Word Sanctify for AoE healing, but you need to target the spell on the screen, and you might not be able to hit all of your teammates if they are spread out. Also, you can spec into Prayer of Healing, and I'd recommend that new players pick up this talent as it can make group-wide damage events easier to handle. However, Prayer of Healing does not feel very powerful, and you can fall behind when group damage is going on even while spamming the ability. At the higher levels of play, Prayer of Healing is not usually run, further removing Holy Priest's access to an easy AoE healing solution, and forcing them into a triage healing playstyle. Here, you need to alternate between flash heal and heal, always targeting different players to heal them up, healing multiple players via Trail of Light. This playstyle requires some quick thinking and can be challenging, especially for newer players. Finally, Holy Priest, arguably being the most reactive healer, also poses a challenge as you need to crisis manage every damage event as it happens, and you can't reliably prepare for it. So where does that leave us with Holy Priest? All in all, I think that the spec is still not particularly difficult to pick up. It lets you sit nicely in the back, and like with Disc Priest, you don't need to worry about interrupting and can focus solely on healing. Because it is so straightforward, I'd say it's slightly easier than Disc, but not by much, and I don't think it belongs in the very easy tier. Next up, we have Resto Shaman. In contrast to Holy Priest, Resto Shamans have historically been rather difficult to play, as they have so many utility spells and myriads of different keybinds. Especially Wind Shear contributes to the difficulty of the spec, as the low cooldown ranged interrupt is a main selling point of Shaman, but it also demands high situational awareness. Despite these complexities, however, the current iteration of Resto Shaman definitely ranks on the easier side, primarily because it has extremely powerful background healing. Just put down a Surging Totem and a Healing Stream Totem, and much of the healing will take care of itself. Also, you have few cooldowns, and especially Ascendance and Healing Tide totems are extremely straightforward and easy to use. Additionally, because you always have Earth Shield on yourself and versatility is one of your best stats, Shamans are also extremely survivable. Really, I have found that I almost never needed to worry about myself when playing Shaman. Conversely, because you run almost no haste, your gameplay feels slow and you don't need to press as many buttons in rapid succession, which also makes the spec slightly easier to play. Your power as a Resto Shaman declines somewhat when your teammates refuse to stand in your healing lane, and that can definitely be a pain point. Shamans also struggle a bit with spot healing, as simply spamming healing surges is not always up to the task, especially at higher key levels. Overall, however, I think the combination of powerful background healing and high survivability makes Shaman the currently easiest healer to play. Personally, when I started playing my Shaman, I remember having some big AoE events going on, placing down my Surging Totem and my Healing Stream Totems, and thinking to myself, that's it. That's all I have to do here. So I definitely think that Shaman deserves the spot at the top of the list in the very easy tier. Next, we look at Preservation Evoker. Oh, Captain, my Captain. Where do we even begin with Preservation Evoker? It's difficult to come up with a single thing that's easy about Preservation Evoker compared to the other healers. The only thing that somewhat comes to mind is that Spirit Bloom has a low cooldown, and you can cycle between Spirit Bloom and Lifespark Living Flames for group healing very, very often. As a result, you have quite strong heals without using any major cooldowns. This healing profile is powerful on fights like the Paladins and Prior of the Sacred Flame, where correctly sequencing your spells leaves you with an answer for every sacred toll. Indeed, for Pres Evokers, the Paladins can feel as though you could heal them indefinitely, whereas other healers might slowly be bleeding cooldowns. However, even these sequences are not really easy to execute, and it's definitely grasping for straws. On the other side of the coin, there's no shortage of things that are hard for Preservation Evokers. First up, the low range can be a nightmare, especially for new players and when playing with pugs in lower key levels. Expect your ranged players to be standing in absolute Narnia at max range and behind you, so that you can't hit them with Temporal Anomaly. So you'll need to decide if you want to shoot it at the melee players or at the ranged players, both of which is suboptimal. Moreover, your healing setups are hard to execute as they require you to prepare your echoes many globals in advance. Therefore, in-depth encounter knowledge is required and you must anticipate when damage is going to be coming in. In addition, your healing setups are also extremely vulnerable, as any players taking unforeseen damage while you're preparing the echoes puts you into the awkward position of having to heal them, which will consume the echoes you had prepared for your healing setup and destroy it in the process. Moreover, Verdant Embrace as a core healing spell is also problematic as it displaces your character, which is extremely dangerous, especially for new players who are not familiar with all dungeon mechanics. As an evoker, even performing your basic healing rotation therefore often puts you at risk of getting one-shot by a frontal or a void zone on the ground. Sure, if you know the fights extremely well, you might know when it's safe to fly and when it's not, but that in itself is also not an easy skill to acquire. Many Evokers will come to the conclusion that it's safest to just Verdant Embrace on themselves, but really that's also just a band-aid fix. All in all, Preservation Evoker has very complex spell and talent interactions, difficult and vulnerable healing setups, limited range and overall moderate throughput. On the flip side, there's few redeeming qualities that could justify these restrictions. If you want to pick up a healer that's easy to play, stay away. However, if you're looking for a challenge, go for it, as Preservation can be a lot of fun. There are also some major buffs coming for Preservation in the next season, although their placement in the talent tree is extremely awkward. I think these changes will enhance the overall power of Press, but they will do little for making the spec more accessible to beginners. Therefore, Preservation goes in the very hard tier, and will probably stay there until the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, and the seas go dry, and the mountains blow in the wind like leaves. Coming up is Resto Druid. As you stack haste, you'll have a lot of buttons to press all the time, and Druid kinda feels like the Fury Warrior among the healers. So, if you're prone to carpal tunnel syndrome or just find it difficult to keep up with faster paced gameplay in general, Resto Druid might not be for you. As a Druid, you must keep your HOTS rolling on your team when damage is coming in. Therefore, the spec requires you to really keep track of which HOTS are on which teammates and to apply missing ones accordingly. As a result, you constantly need to absorb large amounts of information from the party frames, which can be challenging for newer players. Also, Druid is the most proactive healer in the game. You need to know the dungeon mechanics quite well to anticipate when damage will occur, otherwise you can get caught with your pants down when you don't have enough HOTS on your team and big damage is coming in. And really, you don't have very strong cooldowns in these situations to pull them back up. So, Druid is the healer that needs to plan for dungeon mechanics and incoming damage events the most, and you can easily fall behind when making mistakes here. Add to that the constant changing into cat and bear form introduces more complexity, making Druid one of the harder healers to play. On the other hand though, your HOTS are extremely powerful and Druid's throughput is immense. So if you do a good job of keeping your HOTS rolling, then dangerous damage events may not feel as threatening as they do on other healers. Indeed, you can get through most of the game's hardest healing checks without needing to use any of your cooldowns. Overall, the APM required to play Resto Druid and the knowledge requirements of damage patterns make it challenging to play. Still, just standing in the back and spamming HOTS on your teammate is not super difficult to learn for beginners, and in conclusion I think Druid is definitely harder than the priest specs, but not among the hardest healers in the game, and I'll place it in the average tier for now. For the next two healers, Monk and Paladin, I want to preface my opinions by saying that I myself have only recently started playing them, so my overall verdict might not be very well informed. Then again, it also means that I'm a beginner myself on these healers, so perhaps that helps me evaluate how easy they are to pick up a bit better. Both Monk and Paladin are melee-based healers, which means that you need to stand in melee range to heal well. This is already quite demanding, as it can be difficult to see dangerous mechanics when you're in the thick of the fight and in the action. Also, if you can't hit an enemy because there's some space denial on the ground, you need to do some quick thinking to decide which spells to use during this downtime. Let's start with Mistweaver Monk. Because of ancient teachings, your damage heals your teammates similar to Discipline Priest. As a baseline, this makes Monk gameplay rather easy. If you just focus on your damage rotation, a lot of the healing will take care of itself. However, in Season 2 there are also many mechanics that force you to leave the melee range, and Monk can feel awkward in this spot if you don't know exactly what you're doing. So Monk requires some quick decision making and planning in situations where you can't hit the enemy mobs, or your passive healing is not enough. For example, you'll need to use your Vivacious Vivification procs, that's a mouthful, or just make sure that your Jade empowerment is available. As a beginner, I do feel that I'm sometimes falling behind on healing as a monk, and it's difficult to recover because outside of Celestial Conduit and Revival, it can feel like there's few powerful recovery spells available to you. Also, I think that tracking your Vivification, Jade empowerment, Jade Fire teachings, as well as the stacks from GG that make your next Enveloping Mist instant cast is a pretty big barrier to entry for new players. Really, it feels like you need a bunch of weak auras to play Monk effectively, more so than with most of the other healers. So yeah, Monk has a lot going for it, and the overall rotation is simple enough and provides a good amount of baseline healing. However, because you need to maintain melee uptime, you need all of those weak auras, and it's hard to catch up when falling behind, I definitely think Monk should be placed somewhere around here in the hard tier. And finally we get to Holy Paladin. I have quite a bit of experience with Holy Paladin in Soul Shuffle PvP, but that was a while ago and I just started playing it in N+. So from a beginner perspective, I feel that, like Monk, Holy Pally is not very easy to play. First of all, you have an absolute wall of cooldowns that you need to keep track of, and very few of these cooldowns actually feel super powerful. Outside of Avenging Wrath and Lay on Hands, it's not like Pally presses a button and suddenly everything is safe. Instead, you really need to consider spell interactions between Holy Shock, Divine Toll and Holy Prism to get the most out of the specialization. So, a bit like Preservation Evoker, you must actually plan out your abilities very carefully. If you fail to do so, you're punished quite hard, and your spells suddenly feel like they do almost nothing. A single unempowered Holy Shock or Holy Light or Flash of Light can leave you wondering if you even pressed the button to begin with, because it heals so little. So, whenever you've mismanaged your cooldowns and don't have any available, it can be very difficult to keep your party alive as a Paladin, because your abilities just won't do enough healing. That's sort of diametrically opposed to Resto Druid, for example, which does not have many cooldowns but very strong baseline abilities. Maybe it's my inexperience speaking, or it's because my Pally doesn't have the foresight yet, but I think that it is one of the most difficult healers in this season, especially since you're also a melee, which makes it even more challenging. However, it is more forgiving as a Paladin to drop out of melee range than it is as a Monk, as many of your healing spells and some of your damaging spells also work at range. In conclusion, I don't think Paladin deserves being put in the same tier with Preservation Evoker, but I'd argue it's a little bit harder than Monk. So that does it. Here's my final list of healers ranked by how difficult they are to pick up for healing in N+. Do you agree with my order? Would you have ordered it differently? Please let me know in the comments. If you want to get more insights on improving as a healer in N+, feel free to watch my next video here. Like the video if you liked it and subscribe if you really liked it. Thank you very much for watching, everybody, and see ya.